The Darkening Hour, 3 Tales of Ghostly Encounters. Story 1. The Ghost Hostess. It was a dark and stormy night when Sarah and her friends arrived at the old mansion for the Halloween party. The rain was coming down in sheets, making it difficult to see more than a few feet ahead. But Sarah had been looking forward to the party for weeks, and nothing was going to stop her from having a good time. As they approached the mansion's grand entrance, Sarah couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. The house looked even more ominous in the flickering light of the torches that lined the path. But she pushed aside her fears and followed her friends inside. The mansion was unlike anything Sarah had ever seen before. The walls were lined with antique portraits and the floors were covered in thick, red carpeting. The air was thick with the smell of old wood and musty books. And in the center of the room stood a beautiful woman in a vintage gown, welcoming them to the party. "Welcome, my darlings," the woman said, her voice like silk. "I am your hostess for the evening. Please, enjoy yourselves and make yourselves at home." The party was in full swing when Sarah noticed that the hostess had never left her side. Whenever she turned around, the woman was there, watching her with piercing blue eyes. But when she asked her friends if they had noticed anything strange about the hostess, they just shrugged it off. "You're just being paranoid, Sarah," her friend Rachel said. "She's just being a good hostess, making sure everyone's having a good time." But Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about the hostess. She decided to take a walk around the mansion to clear her head. As she wandered through the maze-like corridors, she noticed that the decorations were becoming more and more macabre. The paintings on the walls seemed to be leering at her, and the furniture was covered in cobwebs. She started to feel like she was being watched, and every time she turned a corner, she thought she saw something move out of the corner of her eye. But the scariest part of all was the hostess. She seemed to be everywhere, always watching Sarah with those piercing blue eyes. And whenever she got too close, Sarah could feel a cold draft, as if the woman was sucking the warmth right out of her. Finally, Sarah decided that she had had enough. She headed back to the main ballroom, hoping to find her friends and make a plan to leave the mansion. But when she got there, she realized that the doors were locked from the outside. Panic set in as Sarah realized that they were trapped in the mansion with the ghostly hostess and her strange powers. She turned to her friends, but they had all disappeared. The ballroom was empty, save for the hostess and Sarah. "Where are my friends?" Sarah demanded, her voice shaking. The hostess smiled, a wicked gleam in her eyes. "They've already left, my dear. You're the only one left now." Sarah felt a wave of fear wash over her. She didn't know what the hostess wanted, but she knew that she needed to get out of there. She tried the doors again, but they wouldn't budge. Suddenly, the hostess was right beside her, her hand on Sarah's arm. Sarah tried to pull away, but the woman's grip was like iron. "Please, let me go," Sarah begged. "I just want to leave." The hostess shook her head. "You can't leave, my dear. You're mine now." Sarah struggled against the woman's grip, but it was no use. The hostess was too strong. And as Sarah looked into her eyes, she realized that they were not just blue, but they seemed to be glowing with an otherworldly light. She shuddered, feeling a chill run down her spine. The hostess led Sarah down a long, winding hallway, the flickering candlelight casting eerie shadows on the walls. As they walked, Sarah noticed that the air grew colder and the walls seemed to be closing in around her. "Where are you taking me?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The hostess didn't answer, but led her to a large room at the end of the hallway. The room was empty except for a single chair in the center. The hostess gestured for Sarah to sit down. "Please, just let me go," Sarah begged again. The hostess didn't reply, but instead began to pace back and forth in front of Sarah, her eyes never leaving her. Sarah watched in horror as the woman's dress seemed to shift and change, becoming more and more tattered and worn until it looked like it had been buried for centuries. "What do you want from me?" Sarah asked, her voice shaking. The hostess stopped pacing and turned to face her. "I want what I always want, my dear. A soul to add to my collection." Sarah's heart pounded in her chest as she realized the truth. The hostess was not just a woman, but a ghost. And she was not here to entertain them, but to add to her collection of souls. "I won't let you take me," Sarah shouted, trying to stand up from the chair. But the hostess was too strong and pushed her back down into the chair. Sarah struggled against her grip, but it was no use. The hostess's eyes glowed brighter, and Sarah felt her strength draining away. As she began to lose consciousness, Sarah heard the hostess whisper in her ear, "Don't worry, my dear. You'll join a long line of souls who have passed through this mansion. And I'll keep you forever." And with that, Sarah fell into darkness, her soul taken by the ghost hostess. In the weeks that followed, Sarah's friends searched for her, but she was never found. The mansion remained closed, its secrets locked inside. But the legend of the ghost hostess lived on, a warning to those who dared to enter the mansion on dark and stormy nights. And Sarah's soul remained trapped there, forever a part of the ghostly collection. Years passed, and the mansion became nothing more than a forgotten relic, its halls and rooms gathering dust and cobwebs. But the legend of the ghost hostess persisted, passed down from generation to generation as a cautionary tale to never venture too close to the old mansion on the outskirts of town. However, despite the warnings, there were always those who were curious enough to explore the abandoned mansion. Some went in search of treasure or lost artifacts, while others simply sought the thrill of the unknown. One such group of curious teenagers decided to venture into the mansion one stormy night, seeking adventure and excitement. They knew the legend of the ghost hostess, but they were confident that it was nothing more than a silly old story meant to scare children. As they made their way through the darkened halls, the teenagers laughed and joked, their flashlights illuminating the way. But as they reached the grand staircase, they suddenly heard a sound that sent chills down their spines. It was the sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming from somewhere deep within the mansion. "Did you guys hear that?" one of the teenagers asked, his voice trembling. The others nodded nervously, their eyes wide with fear. They knew that they should leave immediately, but their curiosity got the better of them, and they decided to investigate the source of the sound. As they crept down the hallway, their flashlights flickered and sputtered, casting eerie shadows on the walls. They finally reached the door to the room where the sound had originated, and cautiously pushed it open. What they saw inside the room made their blood run cold. There, standing in the center of the room, was the ghost hostess. Her eyes glowed with an otherworldly light, and her tattered dress swirled around her feet. The teenagers froze, too terrified to move. "You shouldn't have come here," the ghost hostess said, her voice echoing through the room. The teenagers tried to run, but the ghost hostess was too fast. She moved with an unearthly speed, chasing them through the mansion, her eyes fixed on her prey. One by one, the teenagers fell, their souls claimed by the ghost hostess. And as the storm raged outside, the ghostly laughter of the hostess echoed through the halls, a haunting reminder of the dangers that lay within the abandoned mansion. The legend of the ghost hostess continued to grow, and the mansion became a place of terror and dread. No one dared to venture near it, for fear of falling victim to the ghostly hostess and her insatiable appetite for souls. And as for Sarah, her soul remained trapped within the mansion, a prisoner of the ghost hostess for all eternity. Her fate was a warning to all who dared to enter the mansion, a reminder that some secrets were better left buried in the past. Story 2. The Vanishing Guests. It was a warm summer evening when the Petersons arrived at the Grand Hotel. They had been looking forward to their vacation for months, and the Grand Hotel had been recommended as the perfect destination for relaxation and luxury. The hotel was a grand old building with ornate columns and a sprawling lawn. The Petersons were greeted by the hotel staff, who took their bags and showed them to their room on the top floor. As they settled in, the Petersons noticed that the hotel was unusually quiet. They had expected it to be bustling with guests, but there seemed to be very few people around. "Maybe everyone's out enjoying the town," Mrs. Peterson suggested. But as the day turned into night, the silence persisted. The Petersons dined in the hotel restaurant, but there were only a handful of other guests present. They retired to their room early, feeling uneasy about the strange lack of activity in the hotel. As they drifted off to sleep, they heard a faint whispering outside their door. They thought it might be the hotel staff, but when they opened the door, there was no one there. They shrugged it off as their imagination and went back to bed. But the next morning, things became even stranger. When they went down to breakfast, there was no one in the dining room. The tables were set, but there was no food and no staff to be found. The Petersons went to the front desk to inquire, but there was no one there either. They searched the hotel from top to bottom, but there was no sign of any guests or staff. As the day wore on, the Petersons began to feel like they were the only ones left in the hotel. They started to hear strange noises coming from the empty rooms, and the furniture seemed to move on its own. They tried to leave the hotel, but found that the doors were locked from the outside. They were trapped, with no way to escape. As the days turned into weeks, the Petersons became more and more desperate. They scoured the hotel for any clues or signs of life, but found nothing. They began to notice strange things happening to their bodies. Their hair grew longer and their skin grew paler. They felt weak and lethargic, as though they were slowly fading away. And then, one day, they vanished. There was no sign of them in the hotel, no trace left behind. It was as though they had never existed. The legend of the vanishing guests spread throughout the town, and the Grand Hotel became a place of fear and dread. No one dared to enter its halls, for fear of falling victim to the same mysterious fate as the Petersons. Years later, a group of researchers entered the abandoned hotel, hoping to solve the mystery of the vanishing guests. but they never returned, and the hotel remains abandoned to this day, a haunting reminder of the dangers that lurk within the shadows. Despite the legends surrounding the Grand Hotel, there were always those who were curious enough to explore its abandoned halls. Teenagers would dare each other to spend a night inside, and thrill seekers would sneak in with cameras, hoping to capture evidence of the paranormal. But each and every one of them disappeared without a trace, just like the Petersons had. Over the years, the hotel had become a popular subject for ghost hunters and paranormal investigators. Many claim to have captured eerie EVP recordings and shadowy figures on camera, and stories of disembodied voices and ghostly apparitions continue to circulate. But despite the countless investigations, no one had ever been able to uncover the truth behind the vanishing guests. Until one day, a team of researchers from a renowned paranormal research institute decided to take on the challenge of solving the mystery once and for all. The team consisted of 4 investigators: Jane, the leader and expert in psychic phenomena; Mark, a technology specialist with an array of advanced equipment; Sarah, an experienced historian and researcher; and Mike, a former skeptic who had recently become convinced of the existence of the supernatural. As they arrived at the Grand Hotel, they could feel a sense of unease creeping over them. The building was dark and foreboding, and the air was thick with an oppressive silence. They set up their equipment in the lobby and began their investigation. For hours they searched the hotel, moving from room to room, calling out to any spirits that might be present. They used electromagnetic field meters, thermal cameras, and voice recorders, hoping to capture any evidence of paranormal activity. But as the night wore on, they began to realize that there was something different about this investigation. They felt a growing sense of dread and unease, as though they were being watched by something malevolent. And then they heard the first whispers. At first, it was just a faint murmuring in the distance, barely audible above the creaking of the old building. But as they listened closer, they realized that the whispers were growing louder and more distinct. They followed the sound to one of the hotel's many ballrooms, where they found a group of ghostly figures huddled together in the center of the room. They were dressed in formal attire, and their faces were twisted in expressions of fear and desperation. As the investigators watched in horror, the figures began to fade away, disappearing one by one into thin air. The team was shaken by the experience, but they refused to give up. They continued to explore the hotel, determined to find answers. Finally, they stumbled upon a hidden staircase that led deep into the bowels of the building. The staircase was old and crumbling, and the air grew thick and musty as they descended. At the bottom of the staircase, they found a small room that had been sealed off from the rest of the hotel. Inside, they discovered a secret chamber that was filled with strange, arcane symbols and ancient artifacts. As they examined the artifacts, they realized that they were linked to an old legend about a group of occultists who had conducted dark rituals in the hotel's basement. The researchers came to the conclusion that the occultists had somehow summoned an otherworldly entity that had consumed the hotel's guests, trapping them within its grasp. Determined to put an end to the entity's hold on the hotel, the researchers performed a powerful cleansing ritual, banishing the entity and freeing the trapped souls. As the entity vanished, the hotel was bathed in a bright light, and the team felt a sense of peace and closure. The legend of the vanishing guests had finally been solved, and the Grand Hotel was finally free from its dark past. Story 3. The Ghost Party. It was Halloween night, and a group of friends had decided to attend a party at a secluded mansion on the outskirts of town. The mansion had a dark history, and many rumors had circulated about strange happenings within its walls. As they arrived at the mansion, the friends could feel a sense of unease settling over them. The mansion was old and foreboding, with towering stone walls and creaking wooden doors. But they pushed aside their fears and stepped inside, eager to join the festivities. The party was in full swing, with guests dressed in elaborate costumes and the sound of music filling the air. But there was something strange about the partygoers. They seemed to be hovering on the edge of reality, like they were not quite fully present. As the night wore on, the friends began to notice other oddities as well. The food and drinks had a strange, otherworldly taste, and the decor seemed to shift and change as though it was alive. But the most disturbing thing of all was the host of the party, a ghostly figure dressed in a tattered ball gown, who glided through the party with an eerie grace. The guests whispered among themselves, trying to figure out who the ghostly hostess was, but none of them could find an answer. As midnight approached, the party took a darker turn. The music grew louder and more frenzied, and the guests began to dance with wild abandon. But as the night wore on, the dancing became more and more frenetic, and the guests began to move in strange, jerky motions. Their faces twisted in expressions of terror and pain, and their eyes glowed with an otherworldly light. The friends tried to leave, but they found that the doors and windows were sealed shut, and they were trapped inside the mansion. As the night wore on, the friends realized that they were not alone. They could feel a malevolent presence lurking in the shadows, watching their every move. And then, the ghostly hostess appeared before them, her eyes burning with an otherworldly fire. "You have come to my party," she said, her voice echoing through the halls. "And now, you will never leave." The friends screamed in terror as the ghostly hostess summoned forth a swarm of spirits who swirled around them in a frenzied dance. But then, a glimmer of hope appeared. One of the friends had brought along a talisman, a powerful artifact that had the ability to banish spirits back to the realm of the dead. With trembling hands, they pulled out the talisman and began to chant the ancient incantation. At first, it seemed as though the spirits were growing stronger, and the friends feared that they had made a terrible mistake. But then, there was a blinding flash of light, and the spirits vanished into thin air. The mansion was bathed in a soft glow, and the ghostly hostess let out a blood-curdling scream before vanishing into the shadows. The friends stumbled out of the mansion, shaken but alive. As they looked back at the mansion, they could see that it was now crumbling and decayed, as though it had been abandoned for years. As they made their way back home, they could feel a sense of relief settling over them. They had survived the night at the ghost party, but they knew that they would never forget the horrors they had witnessed. Days turned into weeks, and the friends tried to put the events of that night behind them. But they couldn't shake the feeling that something was following them, watching their every move. Strange things began to happen around them. Objects would move on their own, doors would open and close by themselves, and they could hear strange whispers in the dark. One of the friends began to see the ghostly hostess in their dreams, taunting them and promising to return. They knew that they had to do something to rid themselves of this malevolent presence once and for all. They turned to an old friend who was well versed in the supernatural, hoping that they could help them. The friend listened intently as they recounted their experiences, nodding thoughtfully as they spoke. "It sounds like you have a powerful spirit attached to you," the friend said. but there's a way to banish it for good. They instructed the friends to gather some rare herbs and oils and to perform a powerful ritual that would break the spirit's hold on them. The friends were skeptical, but they knew that they had to try. They followed the instructions carefully, gathering the herbs and oils and performing the ritual under the guidance of their friend. As they spoke the ancient incantations, they could feel the air growing thick with energy. And then, there was a blinding flash of light, and the room was filled with a powerful gust of wind. When the wind died down, the friends found themselves standing in an empty room. The malevolent presence was gone, and they were finally free. They looked around in wonder, unable to believe that they had succeeded. They could feel a sense of peace settling over them, and they knew that they could finally move on from the horrors of that night at the ghost party. But as they stepped outside, they could feel a chill in the air. They knew that the ghostly hostess was still out there, waiting and watching. They had banished the spirit for now, but they knew that they could never truly escape the horrors of the supernatural world. They would have to remain vigilant, always watching for signs of the otherworldly, and always ready to fight back against the darkness. Days turned into weeks, and the friends tried to resume their normal lives. But they found it hard to forget about what had happened at the ghost party. They would often wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, with vivid memories of the night's events flooding back to them. As time passed, strange things continued to happen around them. They would catch glimpses of the ghostly hostess out of the corner of their eye, or hear her whispering in their ear when they were alone. They tried to ignore it, but they knew that the spirit was still out there, watching and waiting for a chance to strike. One night, the friends were gathered together at a local bar, trying to take their minds off of the supernatural. But as the night wore on, they noticed that something was off. The other patrons in the bar seemed to be avoiding them, casting furtive glances in their direction. Suddenly, the lights in the bar flickered, and the room grew cold. A familiar chill ran down their spines, and they knew that the ghostly hostess had found them once again. They tried to run, but the doors of the bar were locked, trapping them inside. They could hear the hostess laughing, her ghostly voice echoing through the empty bar. As they huddled together in fear, they knew that they had to do something to fight back against the spirit. They remembered the ritual that their friend had taught them, and they knew that it was their only chance. With shaking hands, they retrieved the herbs and oils that they had used before and began to chant the ancient incantations. The air grew thick with energy once again, and they could feel the spirit's presence growing stronger. But they did not give up. They poured all of their energy into the ritual, and finally, there was a blinding flash of light. The ghostly hostess screamed in fury as she was banished back to the other side. The friends collapsed onto the ground, gasping for breath. They knew that they had defeated the spirit, but they also knew that it would not be the last time they encountered the supernatural. As they stumbled out of the bar and into the cool night air, they realized that they had to be constantly vigilant. The world was filled with spirits and entities beyond their understanding, and they had to be ready to face them at any moment. But for now, they could take comfort in the fact that they had won this battle. And as they walked into the night, they knew that they would face whatever came their way, together.